Help support AMTV by becoming a patron, an AMTV staff member, and following us over on Twitter. Hi there guys, it's Adam Martyn here, and welcome back to another video. Yes, it's me, in Vision. Some of you have been recently saying, why don't we see you anymore, Adam? Well, here you are, you're seeing me now. My hair's not up today, got a more normal swept look going on, you know. But why am I here today? Well, we're going to talk about the ITV network, and specifically, like I know a lot of you enjoy, the logos. The ITV network was first launched back in 1955. It was the first instance of commercial television here in the UK, and it was divided into different regions around the country that were helmed by different companies that were responsible for providing a service. Now, some of the programs were shared across the network, and some of them were produced by those specific regional places, and they also focused on local news, which is still a big part of ITV, or, well, it's under threat recently, but it was certainly a big part of the whole thing. But even though the network doesn't exist anymore as a lot of people remember it back in the golden era of TV, one thing a lot of people do remember about the ITV network, of course, are the logos and how they sort of left an impression on the people who viewed them. So today I thought we would go through all the different companies that, you know, were once part of the ITV network, look at their logos and just talk about them a little bit. So first up, let's start north and start with Grampian. So this was responsible for the north of Scotland, and here is the primary logo that it used through much of its life, just the saltire there, the symbol that you see on the Scottish flag itself. And the various idents that accompanied it were quite simple. Even in the earliest days, they were quite straightforward, as a lot of idents were back then. But I guess the use of the symbol that's part of the Scottish flag really helped Grampian sort of stand out. You know, even if you just saw that symbol alone on the telly, you'd know what region was producing the program or what you tuned into. There wasn't much change over the years to Grampian's overall logo. I mean, here's what it looked like with the generic ITV logo that got introduced in 1989. And you can see there that the saltire is still there. You know, I think you'd still be able to tell that it's Grampian without the text there. Towards the late 90s, they got this. But again, it's still the saltire. This is a pure example of a TV brand that didn't really change its style all that much. It remained fairly consistent throughout its life. Until you get to the 21st century, and then it became this. I guess, you know, this model was also used on Scottish TV, which we'll talk about in a minute, but my God, how boring is this? Especially for early 2000s design as well, really disappointing. I mean, you go from using the main symbol of the Scottish flag to nothing, just a big, mostly empty block. Then eventually Grampian became STV North, which to my understanding it still is today, but I think Grampian as a design is one of the most straightforward of the old ITV network. They picked a symbol that would identify them as a station, that would identify their region, obviously the whole Scotland angle, and they stuck to it for decades. They didn't see any reason to change it up that much. Yes, of course, they introduced different idents over the years, as does any company, but it's nice to see that just the general identity remained the same. And now we're going to move on to the more central part of Scotland and look at Scottish television. Now, this launched in 1957, and here's the earliest example, which, you know, is quite interesting. It feels very of its era, very 50s there. Then in the 60s, you got this, which again feels more of its era. I guess the first recognizable version that a lot of people remember is this one that was introduced in the mid-1960s. You've got the animal there centered with the big strong border, Scottish television around it as well. The animal itself is the lion rampart of Scotland, which features on their coat of arms. So again, sort of like Grampian, taking a symbol that Scots, the viewership of this particular branch of the ITV network are going to recognise. It's a good idea. But then in the era of colour, they ditched that. And for pretty much 15 years, they used this. And again, the font of it looks very 1970s. Once again, it's very of its era. It was probably seen as very contemporary for the time, which is, again, isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think losing the iconography of the lion rampart is a bit hit or miss. I'd argue it's not as recognisable as the saltire, but again, I'm not Scottish, so Scottish people might disagree with me entirely. I don't hate this logo from STV, but I do think, again, from a modern perspective, it's quite dated. And to be honest, the fact this was used until 1985, given the dawn of the 80s, it was probably a bit dated then. In 1985, when they started introducing computer graphics, as a lot of ITV regions did, they debuted this symbol, which, again, is very dated when looking back at it now. I mean, God, if anything screams early 3D computer-generated technology, this is it, you know? What this is actually meant to be, according to what's online, is a thistle. I would not assume that this is a thistle from looking at it, but sure, you do you. And then into the 90s, they sort of flattened the look a little bit. We got this, which, I mean, is a little bit better, but the blockiness of it does sort of date it a little bit. And I would have thought, even by like 1990, as computer graphics got a little bit better, you could have made, you know, a thistle look a bit more realistic, even with CG. I don't know, it's not great, is it? But then, like Grampian, in the 21st century, we got this, which is really dull, really boring, hung around for a few years. Of course, now Scottish television is more commonly known as STV or STV Central, whatever you want to call it. So compared to Grampian, I honestly do prefer Grampian that used the saltire. Nothing wrong with the Lion Rampart, and again, the thistle idea was an interesting concept, but even then, never mind now, it just, whilst it may have been exciting in 1985, the whole design of it, it's not the best in my opinion. Okay, next up we have Border, which ironically, you know, on the border of England and Scotland. Launched in 1961, they launched with this. So this symbol is, you know, memorable to those who remember seeing it. But what is it actually? Apparently it's affectionately known as the chopsticks. That's not what they are before you start. So this is meant to signify 3 different regions. Apparently on the top is meant to represent Scotland. The bottom is meant to represent England again, Border Television. And the bit on the left is meant to represent the Solway Firth. I guess, you know, do you have to have a degree in graphic design to understand that? No. It is an interesting symbol and it's memorable, but it doesn't exactly scream its message out there. And their idents for Border sort of remained the same throughout much of its life. They didn't really make them that interesting. But I mean, the logo stuck around, the symbol stuck around forever, really, as long as Border was going, you know, from the 70s up until the 90s. During the generic logo era of the early 90s, you can sort of see it there, but it's a bit harder to distinguish if you didn't have the text at the bottom there. But they also, you know, they kept the logo all the way up until the new millennium in various guises. It wasn't really until you started seeing like ITV or ITV1 underneath it that you lost the symbol and you just had the word Border. The icon popped up here and there, but particularly as we move more and more through the 21st century, the symbol disappeared and it just became ITV Border, which it is today. This is a very interesting example for me because, like I said, whilst the symbol is memorable and it has an interesting history once you dive into it, how it necessarily played on screen, and again with very lackluster idents in my opinion, it doesn't really stand out for me as one of the highlights in terms of design from the ITV network. So, sorry Border fans. Next up, we have UTV, or Ulster Television, representing Northern Ireland. Launched in 1959, at first what they had was this. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know that this apparently was a competition winner, so well done to whoever designed this. Is it meant to represent the different points that Ulster broadcast to? It has to be something like that, doesn't it? Otherwise, this just looks like a very random symbol. Once colour came in 1969, they sort of swapped it out and they replaced it with this. Now, you can see the sort of up-down lines here have sort of remained, although it's more into this TV box. Some would argue it's a more simplified version, and I'd argue it's this version that people probably remember more fondly than that first incarnation. It was used pretty much up until the 1990s. It went largely unchanged, and similar to some other ITV network stations as well, the idents remained very plain or very similar for a very long time. I think the first computer-generated ones for Ulster didn't come until really late in the 80s, sort of like 1987, 88. But again, this symbol remained. It had clearly become something that was iconic. However, when you see the generic version with the ITV logo, what is this? I know they're trying to fit the identity of a logo in a triangle, but you could have seen the squiggle in the line, surely. Like, I don't know how this happened. It wasn't until 1993 when the UTV moniker that is still used in some capacity today took over and we lost the squiggle. And this just feels like a very 90s design. It feels a bit IKEA as well, but I don't know, I kind of like it. The italic approach, there's something charming about it, you know? And it sort of remained with a similar style and colours. They straightened out a bit before, you know, falling more in line with the ITV brand in general. So with Ulster, again, they picked a concept that sort of lasted for decades and decades, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but I don't know, in this instance I feel like a bit more variety in its life could have maybe done it some good. Next up then, we have Television Wales and West, or TWW. My god, this thing lived a poor short life. It was only on the air for 10 years, from 1958 to 1968. When it launched, we had this, which feels oh so British, oh so classic of its era, very formal, very distinctive, I'll give it that, but you know, very of its time. Come the early 60s, we got something a little bit more unique, rectangular thing here with the bold letters, and again, it feels a bit bare. You got to think of the technology back then of what logos would display best on television. I think this is the more recognizable one compared to the first one, but that first one did have a very classic feel about it, if you get what I mean. TWW went under. There was a whole thing with the 1968 strike. It didn't bow out in the most ceremonious way before Harlock took over. And the visual identity of TWW, mainly that first one for me, stands out, but not necessarily the strongest brand identity. But speaking of Harlock launched in 1968 in the wake of that strike and TWW bidding farewell. And, you know, you may think, oh, the first logo, it's just, you know, blocky text. But, of course, many remember this ident. So this logo, whilst interesting as it is and very 60s as it is, there was a bit of a conundrum with it. Because it was designed with the 405-line television system that was common at the time, if you had a 405-line TV, it would look correct because you're dealing with a lot of moving lines. There's a lot of potential for it to go wrong. However, 625, which was the system BBC Two was using and that the stations would have to transition over to for colour broadcasts, wouldn't necessarily show it correctly. So they couldn't keep this for very long, but it's an iconic ident, and the sort of striped Harlock logo here is often remembered from those who were there, but yeah, a bit of a botched job, technically. But then from 1970 all the way up until the 1990s, you had this. 3 joined letters together, all in that sort of italicized way. And it surprised me, a lot of people, bear in mind this is for Wales and the West, a lot of people remember this logo outside of that region. The ident was very simple. It had a very unique synthesized or like electronic jingle to it. And it is funny, isn't it? Because at its face, this is just 3 letters that have been joined together and italicized, placed at different heights, etc. But it does kind of work. Do you know what I mean? You see this, it's very recognizable, it's standout. And this did last for a very, very long time. When mixed with the ITV generic logo, it doesn't really work, in my opinion. Again, those triangle motifs there, they're sort of hit and miss. Doesn't really work here for me. And then in the mid-90s, they adopted this, which I guess was more in line with the ITV branding as a whole. And whilst it does look alright, it's not quite the same. And I think the 70s HTV was a lot better. So yeah, a very strong design from the 70s. Not bad in the 90s, but as a half Welshie, maybe I'm biased. Next, we have the Channel Islands, with Channel Television, of course, launched in 1962, one of the youngest of the network and the smallest. So this is what they launched with in 1962. You've got 6 hexagons here, the one at the top with a stylized cat's head, very interesting. The 5 hexagons below are meant to represent the Channel Islands, so Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney, Sark and Herm. So again, using shapes or similar to Ulster with the joined dots to sort of represent where we're broadcasting to. I like it, not bad. This stuck around forever, 20 years, well into the era of colour, even though Channel got it late. We did a whole video on that, by the way, so go and check that out. But well into the era of colour until 1982, would you believe? But you know what? It looks just as nice in black and white as it does in colour. It had that memorable jingle to go with it. The hexagonal shapes made it stand out in the network, I'd argue, and it certainly needed to, given its small size. Then in 1982, which lasted until 1998, we got this, abbreviated to CTV. Now, the sort of, you know, split lines, it's very 80s, it's very of its time, if you ask me. But for a lot of people of the Channel Islands, this is what they remember growing up in the 80s and 90s. And it lasted almost as long as the hexagons. For me, the hexagons are the stronger design, personally, just because it's very unique iconography, and I think it really helps the Channel Islands stand out. You look at this, and if you didn't have the Channel Television moniker at the bottom, what channel would this be? It could be any channel called CTV. Do you know what I mean? We had this really cool logo as well that lasted into the first few years of the noughties, and I really liked that. The globe is very BBC One, But I don't know, there's something very cool about this logo. And again, at the time, it was standing out amongst other regions of the ITV network that were still having some sort of regional identity. Channel always sort of stuck with that. Yes, the logos now are a bit more generic, but the station does still carry on. You know, it had its 60th anniversary not too long ago. But in terms of logo design, it's this one for me, man. That first one, designed in 1962, that is Channel Television for me. And I'm sure for many millions as well. Next up on the list, we have ABC Television. Oh boy, again, one that didn't last all that long. It first launched in 1956. It was one of the first of the whole network. It launched with this logo right here, which, like I've said with some of the others, is very of its era. That screams 1950s to me. That is very much what I'd imagine seeing before a film at the cinema, and ABC did own cinemas back then, but by God, this is a very 50s logo. In 1958, and for the rest of its life, we got this interesting triangular symbol here with ABC at the bottom. And I think, obviously, it's this logo that most people do associate with ABC. The arrows coming down and then joining together to form this logo. And, you know, I'd say it was recognizable in its day. Had ABC lasted longer than 1968, it would have been interesting to see, especially as colour was coming around, what they would have adapted to. Would they have kept this logo going into the 70s, as a lot of other ITV stations did, or would they have really changed it up? And I would really hope it'd be the latter, because whilst I think this works great in black and white and is, you know, stands out in its own way, I don't think it would have had that same staying power as others had. But that's just my personal view. Right, let's get on to ATV. I think this is one that most of us know, at least the symbol of anyway. Launching in 1955, obviously one of the initial ones of the network. Here it is, that eyeball logo as it's become affectionately known. Basically lasted throughout ATV's entire life on the network for 27 years here. And there were small revisions, like you can see here, the eyes got less wide, the letters became a bit more blocky, but it was this really that would last until ATV stopped on New Year's Day 1982. The colour version of this looks great. I think it's the best version of the ATV logo, and even today, you know, it's been defunct for over 40 years, but a lot of people know what this symbol is. They certainly remember it, and for me at least, even though it didn't really change much in terms of its logo design or what it was doing with its idents, it still, and quite rightly so I think, remains as one of the most iconic names of the ITV network. Moving on, ATV's replacement, we've got Central. These guys launched in 1982, taking over from ATV, and they launched with this sort of like moon figure, if you want to call it. And this was used in early promos and the first few bits of life on air. But then shortly after, we got this more rainbowized version. Some say it's a ball. I still think it looks like a moon. But you've sort of got the rainbow spectrum added in there. But then in 1985, you've got my favorite iteration of this logo, BAM, which has like the lines, clearly defining sections. You've still got that rainbow pattern. This is obviously when CG was used to start making the idents as well. And there's just something special about this, man. This was used for a very long time, right until the late 90s in some form. You can see here in the ITV generic logo, this is an example, I think, of where putting it in the triangle works better. Having that rainbow stripe really helps, and still showing a curve of the ball or whatever it is, that makes it very clear as to what station you're tuned into. For me, though, it's that 1985 design. There's just something about this one that feels very classic. That is Central to me, and I'm a bit of a sucker for rainbow stripes in design. I don't know what it is, I just think they're really, really cool to see, especially in the world of television, and it's so great that they adopted this, because whilst that first one seen in promos is sort of unique for its time, it doesn't really inspire much, do you know what I mean? Whereas the rainbow pattern added, that's classic. For a lot of people, that sort of ball, moon, whatever you want to call it, particularly with the rainbow stripe coming in, that is Central Television, and again, for me, one of the strongest designs in the ITV network, period. Moving on now to Westward Television. This launched in 1961, ran for 20 years, so not the longest, but it had a symbol that was seen as very recognizable, and it was a ship. Even when it launched, it used the iconography of a classic sailing ship with the sails billowing there on the sea, and I think using a symbol like that is a very strong way of getting your brand recognized. Like, oh, what's that channel again? The one with the ship. You know, it's something we all recognize. It's something that stands out, especially in the black and white era. I think it stood out quite well. There were minor revisions to it, you know, through the 60s, but then into color, we got probably the most recognizable version. That long ident playing out, showing the ship in all its glory, even though it was probably just a model. The name Westward blaring out there. This is arguably the version I think most people remember. And again, it wasn't around all that long, from 1961 to 81 before it was taken over. This ship iconography, whilst Westward isn't remembered all that much compared to the other like big names of the network, their logo, their choice of iconography, I think it made sense for them to keep it. They chose something we can all recognize instantly, and they built on it, they adapted it as the years went on, and I think it paid the dividends. But they were taken over by TSW, or Television Southwest. They launched in 1982. They were only around for 10 years, even longer. They got decimated in the big franchise round of the early 90s. But this was their logo, and this, again, has become... It was only around for 10 years, but it's become iconic in its own right. It's even been in the news recently. Was it some sort of tourist bus company was using this logo somehow? There's been numerous things as to what this logo could mean. Some interpret the blue as the river, the green as different aspects of land. Some say it's like an apple opening. I don't know what apple opens like that. This feels like a quintessential piece of 80s design. You look at that logo, and the first decade that should come to your mind should be the 1980s. But this was what they went with. It's not the best, not in my opinion, but it's memorable. Take out the 3 letters and I'd still be able to tell you what it is. Now, Southern Television. This was one of the big ones when it was around. It launched in 1958. Here you can see the Southern Star logo incorporated here. This one's a bit more intricate, a bit more detailed, which I quite like. Not sure why they ditched this so early on. They ditched it for this version of the Southern Star, which again sort of stuck around largely until its demise in 1981. They didn't really deviate from this, which I kind of respect it for. You know, using the Southern Star. Stars themselves are quite strong pieces of iconography, and you can see a lot of these ITV brands, if they chose a strong piece of iconography, they stuck with it throughout the majority of their life, and I think it's pretty straightforward to see why. It looks great here, especially when we move to colour, you know, against that blue background. You had the little jingle that went with it as well, like a lot of these. This is just one where the symbol is relatively simple. God, that's hard to say. The symbol is relatively simple. Tongue twister. But whilst the symbol is relatively simple, and so are the idents that went with it, admittedly, again, take out the word. What's that? It's Southern. It screams what it is, the Southern Star there. And I can see why they didn't really change it whilst it was around. And, you know, for that reason, it's not one of the longest. But again, like some of the others, it's one of the strongest brands of the ITV network, just from its look alone. Now we have its replacement, Television South. And we did videos on both Southern and TVS's downfall, so you can go and check those out if you're interested. It launched in 1982, was only around for 10 years because, like TSW, it got decimated in the 90s franchise round. But they launched with this, and I like, again, the sort of rainbow effect. I told you already, I'm a bit of a sucker for it, like Central. I think this looks really fun. Again, the design isn't that, you know, that unique, you could say. I sort of like the symbol that goes with it, the rainbow colours. They ditched all that in 1987 for a more sort of sleek look, which isn't bad per se, but I think this is not fun at all. A grey background? Really? A grey background? I'm not a big fan of the colour grey, full stop, but my god, you went from a rainbow effect to this? It was just really sad to see. Big downgrade in my opinion. For the last few years of its life, they added a bit more colour. You can see like some blue hues coming into effect there, which is a bit better, but nah, for me, the rainbow effect, I think, could have been carried over in some way, because whilst this, you know, dark bluey version looks okay, it's just not the same. It removes a lot of the personality, if you ask me. For me, in terms of design at least, that first one with that rainbow motif, that's always going to be the stronger one. Replacing them was Meridian Broadcasting, which took over in the early 90s. And they launched with the most 90s logo possible. Look at that. I mean, if you weren't around, the whole like sun, moon motifs in just designs, it was around everywhere. And I mean everywhere. You couldn't move without seeing one of these printed somewhere. But, you know, I think it really works. It was very different to what a lot of the other ITV network stations were doing at the time. It's very distinct. Again, the sun motif with the bright colours. I'm all for bright colours. And they retained this symbol, you know, for as long as they could before they had to go the more generic route of ITV broadcasting in the mid-noughties. So yeah, they only had the one, and it's one that not a lot of people talk about. Is it very dated in its design? Yes. I mean, again, this is probably the most 90s thing you could have gone with. I think for the time it works. It's not up there for me. It's not one of the top designs ever, but it's unique. And at the very least, especially when you're part of a big network, you want to be unique. Next up then, we have Anglia, which has a very memorable ident, which we'll get to. Launching in 1959. At first, it was mainly just text. You know, this is a fun little text here. But, you know, obviously the text was featured on the ident, which had the famous knight, you know, spinning around, the famous knight on the horse, holding the Anglia flag. And in terms of an ident and a logo, this was pretty much it. For nearly 30 years, one of the longest stints of logos, idents ever, and fair play to them. Everyone back then knew the Anglia Knight. That sequence was memorable, it was iconic, it screamed exactly what it wanted to be. Sort of like Westwood using the ship, using the knight here on the horse, even though it's just a model, really, really helped Anglia carve its place, helped it stand out. They dropped all that for some reason. 1988, they went to this more triangular look, and yes, I know it's meant to be like an A, and you've got the 3 yellow letters there, and it was often seen in like a flag form, but what a step down. You could have easily adapted the knight into a new sort of ident for the 80s and 90s, because whatever this is just not the same. Is it sleek? Yes. Does it feel very 80s, 90s? Yes. It's such a change, but not necessarily in a good way, in my view at least. This for me just didn't hit the mark. The Anglian Knight is one of, and still is, one of the strongest ITV logos, idents, whatever you want to call it, in memory. Next up then, we have Tyne Tees, which launched in 1959. They went with this to start with, which is sort of like the TWW one initially. Very of its time, very 50s. All these tees, I can see why they did that, you know, Tyne Tees television, but I think it looks a bit clunky, a little bit messy, not the strongest there. But then they peaked when colour came around. They designed this. Oh, baby, look at this. Sort of similar to the HTV logo, you know, join letters together there. Some would say it's very of its time, and in a way it is, but by God, again, what a symbol. It's just something about its look. It's uniformed, but it isn't, with the V in the bottom right there. There's something about it, particularly in colour, that is very striking. It's very memorable, and they used this for decades, over 20 years, with very little changes. They decided to swap the colours in the late 80s, like, so the background became yellow and the logo became blue. Not really sure why they wanted to do that, but nevertheless they did. But for me, it's that blue background, yellow blocky logo there. That is Tyne Tees, and that's what it is to many. Even look at this in the generic logo. Somehow they messed this up. I can see the edges of the T's there, but I think they should be a bit more prominent. In the 90s, they decided to keep the look of the logo, but change it to this weird red, blue, green against grey streaky colour. I think it looks a bit naff, to be honest with you. They changed the font a bit later on to something a whole lot worse. They became Northeast 3 for a little bit. That was a weird era. And then they went back to sort of the Tyne Tees TV, but not joined up. And again, albeit just a little bit worse. So whilst it tried new things, which again, I respect that, always try and vary up where you can. But for me, that logo introduced in 1970 that lasted for so long, the join letters, blue background with the yellow logo, that is iconic. And again, I know I've been saying it a lot, but there's a reason why a lot of these logos are revered and remembered, right? It's because they stood out. They had logos that were recognizable anywhere. And Tyne Tees, at least this particular version of it, is certainly one of them. Now, another big boy of the network, we've got Granada, launching in 1956, and this was their first logo. So yes, they still have the arrow pointing upwards. You've got the Granada in the blocks there. Sort of feels a bit BBC-ish, if you ask me, but this lasted for a while, until 1968. Then, just as they were gearing up for colour, they swapped to this, and I think it's this that the vast majority of people would say, God damn, that's the Granada logo. That particular font they used, the arrow symbol now incorporated into a G, which again, as a logo, is so slick, by the way. That is a slick piece of design, and there's a reason why they kept it for so long. I mean, the symbol, at least, they sort of kept forever. The idents weren't necessarily the most inspired or the most varied, but in a way, did they really need to? Granada was just such an iconic brand. I mean, being one of the biggest in the network certainly helps, but when you've got a symbol like this, that is such an instant, memorable thing to point out, even before the word Granada pops up. You can see in the generic logo here that this is what they went with, even though it wasn't really used that much, but I can sort of see what they were going for, but it just didn't really work out. The 90s, they kept the logo, but mainly changed the font. They put the logo in this rectangle for some reason. This stuck around for a lot of the 90s, and yeah, I mean, it's a bit more up to date, but I mean, keeping the logo, I think, was a strong choice. The symbol, I should say. But the symbol stuck around for a long time, right up until the mid-2000s, before everything went very generic ITV, which is a shame, really. I know I've said that a lot, but I mean, that is what happened. It would have been nice if, okay, go generic ITV, have ITV as the main moniker, but why not in, like, the corner of the screen or somewhere? But why not say in the corner of the screen or, you know, at least somewhere on screen? Why not dedicate a bit of space to including, you know, the famous logos of yesteryear? I think that would have been a nice touch. I mean, what else is there to say about Granada? It's not only is it one of the biggest in the network, the symbol is one of the most recognized and most iconic of the network, full stop. It's one of the best. Whoever designed that, they were onto something. Next, we have what would have been my region back in the day. It's Yorkshire. Gonna try and not be biased here. So they launched in 1968. They launched with this, the chevron, the classic chevron, which they used for, well, pretty much a very, very long time with the Yorkshire television below it. They didn't really change it much. They kept the chevron in one form or another throughout the vast majority of its time on the air. Yeah, you didn't need much apart from that iconic jingle that went with it. Yorkshire television text, the yellow chevron, you didn't really need that much. It was just, it was what it was. You got the famous liquid gold ident from the late 80s. That one's always fun. All the way through the 90s, through thick and thin, the chevron was retained. Even into the 2000s, the chevron was retained as well. It was only with the big sort of generic push in the early years of the 2000s that we lost the chevron, which again is a great shame. I think you could have kept the symbol in some way, shape or form. But like so many others, they didn't need to change their symbol because why would they? They'd hit on something that became so, again, instantly recognizable. You heard that jingle, that bam, ba-dum, bam, ba, and saw that yellow chevron, whether it was rising from liquid gold or zoomed to the front of your screen or just faded in. You knew what you were on. This was Yorkshire television, which carried with it, you know, a degree of quality in many cases. I'm a bit biased being a Yorkshireman myself, but come on. There's a reason. There's a reason why this one's so good. It's simple. It's a yellow chevron for in most of its life. That's it. That's all they did. But it works, and it worked for decades. Good on you, Yorkshire. We're moving on now to our last few, and we're starting with Rediffusion, which was, some would say, the inaugural ITV station representing London. So in 1955, they used this sort of star symbol, which sometimes stayed still, sometimes spun. It was very early days. It's very primitive. I don't have that much to say about it, really. In the last few years of its life, they sort of modernized their presentation a little bit, made it feel a bit more 1960s compared to what came before, but that was really it before they disappeared. I mean, that sort of, whatever you'd call it, this sort of starry logo or spiky logo, whatever you want to say, yeah, it's all right, but it's not really that memorable, is it? I think that's one only the enthusiasts are going to call you out for, really. It may have been a trailblazer. Like I said, it was the first part of the ITV network to go on the air, but aside from that, it's not really got that much going for it. So if you like it, I'm sorry. Let's move on to yet another big boy of the network. It's Thames Television, representing London, taken over from Rediffusion in 1968. In terms of just its actual logo, it's this. It's the word Thames in Helvetica. You can't get any more standard than that, can you? But of course, the symbol that everyone remembers, the one they used for decades and decades, is this, the sort of skyline, if you can call it that, from the Thames, incorporating some of London's most iconic landmarks, you know, in their ident. We all remember the ident with the famous jingle that went with it. Once again, they really struck on that. And this ident was used in some form or another. It had its variations, of course, but they used this forever, like decades and decades. It wasn't until 1989 when they adopted a sort of a bit more modern, but also honour the roots of Thames Television as well, which I think they did quite well. In terms of the ITV generic logo, this is a strong example of where it worked. Look in that triangle there, using the skyline from the logo. Works really well, really slick. Probably my favourite of the 89 generic logos, in fact, because this one just works. I mean, it helped the fact that Thames at the time was using a triangle logo itself, so it slotted into ITV quite nicely, but that just works, man. And then this sort of logo that they used for the last few years of their life, again, this felt like a really positive evolution. This felt like the right direction to go from the 1990s, because iconic as the first one was, come on, by the early 90s, it was probably starting to look a little bit dated, something that was designed back in the late 60s. Thames, of course, bit the dust in 1992. It was a big shock at the time, but even though this last logo is really slick and really nice, let's be honest with ourselves here. It's this one. It's the version from, the late 60s to the late 80s that appeared before every Thames programme. So many great Thames programmes as well that audiences up and down the country are going to remember. And some would say it is one of, if not the most memorable, most iconic, most easy to point out logo of the whole ITV network. I don't know if I'd say that personally, but I know a lot of people would. But then Thames's replacement was Carlton, and I know a lot of people don't like Carlton. This was their logo before they launched, and it's boring. It's the worst example of 90s blandness. They launched with this, which stuck around for quite a long time, which is a bit better, but it's not very exciting, is it? Towards the end of the 90s, they added the star, which, I mean, I remember this on a lot of my Carlton videos, but it just feels a bit unprofessional. It feels a bit slapdash. It feels a bit cartoony. Doesn't really reflect the station. I'm not necessarily a Carlton naysayer, but in terms of their logos, yeah, they didn't really do a good job. And our last one that we haven't talked about yet is, of course, London Weekend Television. They represented London at the weekends, funnily enough. Now, they took over in 1968, and surprisingly, they took over with this. Just this. Sort of like Thames, just text, which is very boring. They added some sort of thing around it in 1969, which is slightly better, but still not the most interesting. But then it was in 1970 they really hit on something that would work. 3 lines, the colours of the United Kingdom flag, I guess, coming down from the top of the screen, spelling out LW for London Weekend, again with a very good jingle to go with it. And that worked. That worked through most of the 1970s. They also added this variant, which is just the 3 letters, which again, from a logo perspective, does it feel a slight bit dated now? Potentially. But for the 1970s into the 80s, I see this working just fine. Although for me, the flowing version, as I call it, the river version, always will be a personal fave. In the mid-80s, with the advent of computer-generated idents, they slightly changed the LWT logo. They sort of darkened the colours a little bit there. You can see the blue's a lot darker. The red is a bit more vibrant as well. With the ITV generic logo, of course, this works a bit better. Considering your logo is mainly 3 coloured stripes, fitting that into a triangle is not too difficult. They went with this in the mid-90s, just making each letter its own colour, which I think is way worse than what came before. It's far less interesting and just it's a little back to the boring days now, sadly. LWT, like most of the others, went generic in the mid-2000s with the rest of the ITV branding. But, even though the late 70s to mid-90s, the 3 letters like this is memorable, come on, the flowing one, that river sequence that dominated for much of the 70s, that's LWT. And again, for me at least, one of the strongest logos within the network as a whole. Really nice piece of design there. Can you tell there was a lot of good design going on back in the day? So there we have it. Those are all of the primary logos of the main companies that helm the ITV network. And what I thought I'd do to round off, I thought it'd be quite fun, would be to give my personal ranking. I'm taking all of the logos sort of each company into account as best I can, and this is just my personal opinion. If your favorite isn't number 1, don't worry about it. You can let me know in the comments, but this is just my personal opinion of my favorites. So in 23rd, in last place, it's Carlton. Yeah, it's Carlton. In 22nd, it's Rediffusion. 21st is TWW. 20th is Border. 19th is ABC. In 18th, we've got Meridian. 17th is Ulster, sorry Northern Ireland viewers. In 16th, it's Scottish. 15th is Grampian, again sorry Scots. 14th is TSW. In 13th, we have TVS. 12th is Westward. 11th is HTV. I'm sorry, my Welshies. I'm sorry it wasn't higher. 10 is Central. Number 9 is Anglia. Number 8 is Southern. In 7th is Channel. 6th, Tyne Tees. 5th, ATV. 4th, London Weekend. And for our top 3, in 3rd place, it's Thames. 2nd is Yorkshire. I know, shock horror. And 1st, it's Granada. There's just something about that symbol, man. It just really works for me. And that is the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching if you made it this far. Please leave a like on it if you enjoyed it, really helps us out. If you want to see more logo look-throughs and rankings like this, give me some thoughts in the comments. What kind of channels or companies would you want me to take a look at? Subscribe to the channel as well if you're brand new. We'd really love to have you aboard. And in the meantime, I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show. And a special thank you to Macra, Sean Knock, Dord Khan, Liam Domain, AJ Mac 200017, Deck, Jen, Traffy, Evan Hart 42 Radio, Tim Ripley, Mr. Eurovision 1986, Marnanel Thurman, 40-something Manchild, Jerry Ralph, John McLeod, James Wallace, Ben, Stephen Oliver, Tegan, Shadowfiend 180X, Swan Ronson, Adam Gamer, Fonzie Daz, Seraphic Euphoria, Real Random, Matthew Elliff, Pigeon's House, and Shah H, are AMTV staff members.